Hello everyone, just making a little overview video on Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 units on the Cortex side, so you can get a grasp on their ranges and their costs and a few other things. The most common starting bot units are these grunts here, which have a really high DPS for a low metal cost. The only negative thing is they have low health and low range. Now, the most second common tier 1 bot is the aggravator, which has long range but costs about 4 times as much metal to create. It also has about a third less damage per second compared to the grunt. So why would you make these? Well, it's because of their range. It can outrange twin guards, which are double laser towers, and LLTs, which are single laser towers. There's a double here, and on the left there's a single. The double ones have slightly more range, but the aggravators can outrange them both. So you want a few of them so they can hit defenses on the front lines at the beginning of the game. In the example here, it's getting damaged, but it'll keep getting healed by my construction towers in the back, so I can keep showing you examples for this video. It's also a good note that the cheap grunts are much faster than the aggravators here too. Now, the last tier 1 bot, other than the anti-air unit here on the far left, is the thug, which has more range than the grunt, but costs, again, like over 4 times as much metal and is slower, but it doesn't have as much range, as you can see here, as the aggravator, so it can't outrange these laser towers. So why do people use that? Well, it's just to outrange units, I think. I'm still learning this game, so I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's what I got from it so far. I find it's a less popular bot made at the beginning of the game. Now for some T1 vehicles. There's quite a lot more. I currently have them firing at their maximum distance. Now, starting with the Garpike, which is a light amphibious tank. It can travel both on land and water. It costs about twice as much metal as a regular light tank, as you can see here, 118 compared to 220 for the amphibious one. It also has 20 less damage per second. So you'd only want to make these amphibious vehicles if you had to go through water as well. Going through these units with all of you will actually help my gameplay a lot, since I'm a new player as well. So I'm glad I'm doing this. Moving on to the missile truck, otherwise known as a lasher, and the Wolverine, which is the light mobile artillery. The light mobile artillery can range farther than the missile truck, but it is a lot slower than the missile truck, as you can see there. I like the missile trucks more because it does more DPS due to being faster, but the light mobile artillery is helpful for doing a big amount of damage in one hit due to it firing much slower. And they cost the same metal of 145. Now, the Rascals are light scout vehicles that move really fast and are cheap, weak, and are good at the beginning of the game or for spamming a lot of units later in the game. Light tanks have fast speed and good DPS, but are weak in health. They're good at the beginning. Now there's the Pounder, which is a riot tank that has pretty fair DPS, and Brutes, which are medium assault tanks, which have slightly lower DPS than riot tanks, but have about 33% more health than riot tanks. So it's a trade-off between either having more health or a little bit more DPS and a bit shorter range. I find more people go with the medium assault tanks. Now there is tier 1 hovercraft. They're not used as often. They're better if you have a map that you need to go to water to land, and skim across it. They're pretty much similar to tier 1 vehicles, except they have less health, but they're good at taking out like ship docks and other things on the water. They're probably not the main things you should focus on if you're just starting out in this game, but anyway, I'll go through them anyway. There's the Cayman hover tank, which has a medium amount. There's the Halberd that has a high amount but costs more metal. There's the Mangonel, which is a hovercraft rocket launcher similar to the tier 1 vehicle version. There's the Bird Eater, which is an anti-air hovercraft. Doesn't have has good DPS as the land vehicle. And then there's a Goon, which is a fast tech hovercraft, which is good at the beginning of the game if you have a map where you have to skim over water. Now moving on to tier 2 bots. We have the Raider Invisible spy bots. I haven't really used them myself yet, but they give you radar and you are cloaked. I think as long as the enemy unit doesn't go in within that yellow inner circle, it stays cloaked, or it could be detected with an enemy tracer building. There's regular radar bots that cost less metal that can't be cloaked, and then there's deceivers that are radar jammer bots, and you can hide your unit within its jammer so they don't know what type of units are coming their way. I move them to the side because they don't do any damage. Now there's fiends that are fast assault bots, have high damage, high speed, but are also low health. They're great for hitting a lot of squishy units, especially tier 1 units, but they have a very low range, as you can see the fire there. Then we have arbiters, which are heavy rocket bots, which are the farthest T2 range bots there are. They have low DPS and low health, but yeah, they have that huge range. Then we have the Manticores, which is just an anti-air bot, which only shoots air vehicles. There's the range of that. I'll move that to the side. And now we have these mammoths, which have a huge amount of health, but are really slow. They are great for pushing up, and they do a lot of DPS as well. They cost a lot of metal, but they're great for like pushing up to enemy bases, just because they're so tanky. But they can be outmaneuvered because they're so slow, and be targeted easier by artillery and missiles just because of the speed. As you can see here, they have a decent amount of range as well, which is nice. Now there are bed bugs that are amphibious that can go in the water and land and do massive amounts of damage. I haven't really used them too much myself, but they're really cheap to make too. They cost more power than anything. There's that red circle, and bam. They're very easy to shoot down though. Moving on to the Sumo, which is an armored assault bot. They're really similar to the Mammoth, except they're 1/3 of the health, a little bit faster, but they have way shorter range, but still a high DPS. They're probably better to go with if the enemy doesn't have far range units, but usually I find that they do. Now for the Sheldons, they're very squishy and they're easy to die, but if you keep them far back, they have extreme range, so they're great for hitting units at range. But you have to macro them, otherwise they will die easy. They cost about a medium amount of metal of 410. Moving on to tier 2 vehicles, you have the Omen radar vehicle, and which I'll move over here because it doesn't do any DPS, and the Obscure, which is a radar jammer vehicle that hides your units just like the bot version. Then you have the Fury, which is an anti-air flank vehicle, which I'm going to move over here. It is extremely good at taking down air and getting it into positions fast. Then we have the Alligator medium amphibious tanks. Again, don't make these unless you need to go through water because they have lower DPS and they don't have as much health for their cost. Then we have the Quaker mobile artillery that has really far range, as shown here. They're going to be cheaper than the Tremor here, which is a heavy artillery vehicle that costs about 6 times more metal, but it has a crazy amount of DPS, but it's not very accurate. It goes all over the place, as you're going to see here. But it does a lovely area attack, so it's good at taking out bases and stuff like that, or clumped up units. Now we have the Tigers, which are heavy assault tanks. I like making these when I first make a tier 2 vehicle factory. They're also a little faster to maneuver and cheaper in metal. We also have these Banishers, which are heavy missile tanks, which are similar to the bot versions where they have higher DPS compared to artillery, but just not quite as long range. So I like having those personally myself, but they do cost about 4 times more metal than the regular artillery vehicles, but they have also 4 times the health, so it evens out in my opinion. Then there's the T-Zars, which have a high amount of health because they're very heavy assault tanks, and they have decent DPS and about a medium range. They're great to build when you can afford the metal to build them. Then you have the Poison Arrow, which is a very heavy amphibious vehicle. Again, it does cost a little less metal, but has lower DPS, lower range, and it should only be really built if you need to go through water again. Lastly, there's the Negotiator, which is a stealthy rocket launcher, which is the unit with the longest range. It's good for its range. It has low health. It's really bad at the front lines, but if you can keep it protected and far away, it's great. It's also great for shooting hilltops or geothermals or anything like that. Moving on to tier 3 units, we have the Shiva, which is an amphibious siege mech. Again, only really good if you have to go through water, otherwise there's better options. Then we have the Karganeth, I don't know if I'm pronouncing right, which is an all-terrain assault mech, which can go up hills and stuff. I'll show you that in a sec. Then there's a Cataphract, which is a heavy laser hover tank. Again, only really great in the water. And then we have the Behemoth, which is a really tanky unit. I think it has the most health out of any unit in the game. It's extremely slow, and it has 3 weapons. One weapon has a farther range, and then there's 2 closer range weapons. You can see how slow it moves here, and the range of the different weapons with the different red circles there. Forgot to mention the Karganeth also has 2 weapons. You can see there, shoulder rockets and Karganeth missiles. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right, so sorry. Then there's the catapults, which are heavy rocket bots that have a really long range and can do a massive amount of damage as well. They have lower health, so you want to keep them at range, and they're a more expensive unit. Here's an example of the Karganeth on top of a mountain. They're really good at staying up there because they're hard to hit, and they can only really be hit by like missile trucks or other similar units. As you see, they have a decent amount of range, and yeah, that's what they're good for, to keeping them on mountains. Then lastly, we have the Juggernauts, which are the most expensive unit, but they have like the highest DPS, and they're a little bit faster than Behemoths. They only have half the amount of health, but they're still pretty tanky, so they're great final game units. They're slow, but they're not as slow as Behemoths. And they have, I think, 4 weapons on them to get that DPS. Hope you guys found this video helpful. If you liked it, it took a lot to edit, hit the like button, and hopefully in the future I can earn your subscription. Have a good day.